80-year-old woman gave birth to a giant bird. Unbelievable story. The sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the small, forgotten village nestled in a valley that seemed untouched by time. It was the kind of place where the air smelled of freshly tilled earth and wood smoke, where life moved at a pace that had more in common with centuries past than the modern world. It was here, amidst the ancient trees and crumbling stone cottages, that Maria lived, a quiet, unassuming woman who had seen 8 decades of life pass by. Yet her story, one that defied explanation, would soon ripple far beyond the valley. Maria shuffled through her garden, a woven basket dangling from her arm. Her hands, gnarled with age and hard work, picked through the tomatoes, feeling their weight and testing their ripeness. Gardening had always been her solace, the one thing she could count on as the seasons changed and time took from her what it always did. Her husband had passed years ago, and her only son had moved to the city, leaving her with memories and the solace of routine. The villagers, kind but distant, often whispered about her, calling her La Abuela del Valle, the grandmother of the valley. They saw her as wise but strange, a relic of another era. As Maria returned to her cottage that evening, she felt an unusual heaviness in her chest, a weight she couldn't quite place. She paused by the door, looking up at the sky where stars were just beginning to shimmer in the twilight. There was something in the air that night, a strange charge like the moment before a storm. She brushed it off as her imagination, something her old bones were conjuring up to keep her company. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. That night, Maria dreamed of birds. Not the small sparrows and doves she was used to seeing flit about her garden, but something massive, golden, and glowing. In the dream, she stood in a field as the great bird descended, its wings spanning the sky, its feathers glimmering as though they had captured the sun itself. The bird landed before her, tilting its head as if studying her. Maria reached out her hand, trembling, and just as her fingers brushed its radiant plumage, she woke with a gasp. Her cottage was dark, the only sound was the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. But her body felt alive in a way it hadn't in decades. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady thrum of her heartbeat. It was as if the dream had left something behind, something she couldn't name. The days that followed were anything but ordinary. Maria began to notice changes, subtle at first. A warmth in her body that felt foreign, a renewed energy that made her move with ease through tasks that had once left her exhausted. Her appetite grew, and with it came a strange craving for things she hadn't eaten in years. Honey, fresh fruits, and herbs from her garden suddenly seemed irresistible. The villagers noticed her transformation too, their whispers growing louder. "Have you seen Maria lately? She looks younger," one would say. "Perhaps she's found some secret remedy in her garden," another would reply, half joking. Maria, for her part, avoided their questions. She didn't know how to explain what was happening to her because she didn't understand it herself. All she knew was that something inside her was changing, and it frightened her as much as it fascinated her. One evening, as she sat by the fire knitting a shawl, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. It was sudden and fierce, pulling a gasp from her lips. She doubled over, the knitting needles clattering to the floor. The pain subsided as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless and bewildered. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, and to her shock, she felt a slight but undeniable swelling. "No," she whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling. "It's not possible." But the days ahead would prove otherwise. The swelling grew, as did her strength and vitality. Her skin, once thin and lined, seemed to regain a soft glow. Her hair, streaked with gray, appeared richer, fuller. The villagers stopped whispering and started staring outright when she passed. "She's bewitched," some said. "Blessed by the spirits," others countered. Maria stayed silent, her mind a whirlwind of questions. What was happening to her? And why did she feel, despite the impossibility of it all, a strange sense of calm? It was as if her body knew something her mind couldn't grasp. Weeks turned into months, and the changes in Maria became impossible to hide. Her abdomen swelled like that of a woman far along in pregnancy. The pain came in waves now, each one stronger than the last, but they brought with them a peculiar sense of purpose. It was as if her body was preparing for something extraordinary. She avoided the village entirely, fearful of their reactions, and spent her days tending to her garden and talking to the unborn life within her as though it could hear her. "Who are you?" she would ask softly, her hands resting on her belly. "What are you?" One stormy night the answer came. The rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled like a living thing. Maria was in her bed, her breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. The pain was unbearable now, radiating through her body in waves that left her trembling. She knew, deep in her soul, that the moment had arrived. The storm seemed to quiet as if holding its breath. And then, with one final, searing pain, Maria felt a release. She opened her eyes, her vision blurred with tears and exhaustion, and saw something that stole her breath away. There, lying at the foot of her bed, was a bird. But it was unlike any bird she had ever seen. Its feathers shimmered with an iridescent glow, catching the dim light of the room and refracting it into colors she couldn't name. Its wings, even folded, spanned nearly the length of her small bed. And its eyes, those deep golden eyes, looked at her with an intelligence that was almost human. The bird let out a soft, melodic cry, and Maria felt a wave of warmth wash over her, a sensation of peace and wonder that she hadn't felt in years. She reached out a trembling hand, and the bird tilted its head, allowing her fingers to graze its feathers. They were warm, almost hot, and impossibly soft. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You're beautiful." The bird responded with another soft cry, its eyes never leaving hers. Maria knew at that moment that this was no ordinary creature. It was a miracle, a mystery, and somehow, a part of her. Maria didn't sleep that night. How could she? The creature before her defied everything she understood about the world, about herself. It rested beside her, its chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm, its golden eyes occasionally flickering open as if to reassure itself that she was still there. The storm outside had dissipated into a gentle drizzle, the sky beginning to lighten as dawn approached. Maria sat in her chair by the fire, staring at the bird with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. By morning, word had spread. The villagers, already suspicious of Maria's transformation, were now buzzing with rumors. It was impossible to keep something this extraordinary a secret. One of her neighbors, curious and bold, had crept close to Maria's cottage in the early hours and seen the faint glow emanating from the window. By the time the sun was fully up, there were whispers of miracles and curses, and a small crowd had gathered outside her gate. Maria watched them through the curtains, her heart heavy with apprehension. She knew she couldn't hide forever, but how could she explain what had happened when she didn't understand it herself? The bird, sensing her unease, let out a low, melodic hum. It had not spoken, at least not in words, but its presence carried a strange comfort, as though it understood her fear and wanted to reassure her. "Do you understand me?" Maria whispered, feeling foolish even as she spoke. The bird tilted its head, its golden eyes locking onto hers. It blinked once, slowly, and Maria swore she felt an unspoken answer, yes. The knock at her door came just as she was working up the courage to face the villagers. It wasn't the loud, insistent banging of an angry mob, but a tentative tap, as though the person on the other side was as nervous as she was. Maria hesitated before opening it, her breath catching when she saw Father Raphael, the village priest, standing on her doorstep. His face was kind but serious, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. "Maria," he said gently, his voice carrying the weight of concern and authority. "May I come in?" Maria hesitated, glancing back at the bird. It remained still, its gaze steady but unthreatening. Finally, she nodded and stepped aside, allowing the priest to enter. Father Raphael had always been a source of wisdom in the village, a man respected by all for his compassion and open mind. If anyone could help her make sense of this, it was him. The priest's eyes widened when he saw the bird. For a long moment he said nothing, simply taking in the creature before him. Then he crossed himself and murmured a prayer under his breath. "It's true," he said finally, turning to Maria. "The villagers told me, but I didn't believe them. I had to see it for myself." Maria nodded, unsure of what to say. She felt like a child caught doing something she couldn't explain, though she had done nothing wrong. "This," Father Raphael gestured toward the bird. "This is extraordinary. A gift, perhaps. Or a test." Maria's brow furrowed. "A test." The priest sighed, his kind eyes meeting hers. "The world is full of mysteries, Maria. Some are meant to challenge our faith, to see how we respond to the unexplainable. Others are blessings, though we may not understand them at first." He approached the bird cautiously, his movements slow and deliberate. The creature watched him but made no move to flee or attack. When he reached out a hand, it let him touch its feathers, and Father Raphael's expression softened. "It's warm," he said, almost to himself. "Alive in a way that feels divine." Maria felt a lump rise in her throat. "Do you think it's a sign? From God?" The priest didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt before the bird, his head bowed in silent prayer. When he finally rose, his expression was thoughtful. "I cannot say for certain," he admitted. "But I do know this, Whatever it is, it was meant for you. Maria blinked back tears. She wanted to believe him, to see this as a blessing rather than a burden. But doubt gnawed at her, fueled by the weight of the villagers' judgment and her own unanswered questions. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I can't keep it a secret, but if they see it, they'll fear it," Father Raphael finished for her. "Fear what they don't understand. But perhaps that fear can be turned into something else. Curiosity, wonder, faith." Maria wasn't sure she believed him, but his words brought a small measure of comfort. She nodded, and the priest placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I will speak to them," he said. "Prepare them. But you must be ready to show them, Maria. Hiding will only feed their fear." After Father Raphael left, Maria sat beside the bird, her hand resting on its soft feathers. She didn't know if she was ready, but she knew the priest was right. The world outside was waiting, and sooner or later she would have to face it. The next day, Father Raphael returned, accompanied by a handful of villagers. They stood at a respectful distance, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Maria opened the door and stepped onto the porch, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's all right," the priest said gently. "Show them." Maria hesitated, then stepped aside, revealing the bird. A collective gasp rose from the group, followed by a stunned silence. The creature, sensing the attention, spread its wings slightly, the light catching its feathers and casting a golden glow across the room. One of the villagers, an older woman named Rosa, crossed herself. "Dios mío," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Others nodded, their fear slowly giving way to awe. Maria watched their faces, her own fear beginning to melt as she saw the wonder in their eyes. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that this might not be a curse after all. But not everyone was so easily convinced. A man in the back of the group scowled, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "It's unnatural," he muttered. "An omen, not a miracle." Father Raphael turned to him, his voice firm but calm. "And who are we to judge what is natural and what is divine? Perhaps this is here to teach us something, to remind us of the mysteries beyond our understanding." The man didn't respond, but his scowl deepened. Maria felt a pang of anxiety but pushed it aside, focusing instead on the others. Rosa stepped forward, her hand outstretched, and Maria nodded, allowing her to touch the bird's feathers. Rosa's face lit up with a smile, and she turned to the others. "It's not something to fear," she said. "It's something to marvel at." The crowd began to disperse after that, their whispers softer now, tinged with curiosity rather than suspicion. Father Raphael stayed behind, his expression thoughtful. "You've taken the first step," he said. "But this is just the beginning." As the days turned into weeks, Maria's life became a strange blend of routine and wonder. The bird, which she now called Solis for the way its feathers seemed to capture and reflect the sun's light, became a constant presence in her home. It followed her with an intelligence that felt almost human, watching her as she cooked, cleaned, and tended to her garden. Though it did not speak, its melodic cries and gentle nudges conveyed a sense of understanding that deepened their bond. The villagers, for the most part, had accepted Solis. Children came by to catch glimpses of the creature, their laughter ringing out as they marveled at its glowing plumage. Maria allowed them to peek through the window or step inside if they were brave enough, always keeping a watchful eye to ensure Solis remained calm. The bird seemed to sense their innocence, responding with soft chirps that made them giggle. But not everyone was at ease. A small but vocal group in the village continued to view Solis with suspicion. Among them was Tomas, the man who had scowled during the first meeting. He had always been a loud, opinionated figure in the community, quick to judge and slow to forgive. To Tomas, Solis represented something unnatural, a disruption to the order of things. "It's not right," he told anyone who would listen. "An old woman giving birth to a creature like that? It's an omen, I'm telling you. Something bad is coming." His words found fertile ground in the minds of those who were already uneasy. Though they didn't voice their concerns as loudly as Tomas, a sense of underlying tension began to creep into the village. Maria could feel it when she went to the market or passed by the church. A subtle shift in the way people looked at her, their smiles polite but strained. One evening, as Maria sat by the fire with Solis perched beside her, Father Raphael paid her another visit. His face, usually calm and reassuring, was lined with worry. "Maria," he began, his voice gentle. "There are whispers in the village. Tomas is stirring up fear and some are starting to listen." Maria sighed, her hand resting on Solis's warm feathers. "I've done nothing wrong, Father. Solis has done nothing wrong." "I know," the priest replied. "But fear is a powerful thing. It can blind people to the truth. What should I do? Maria asked, her voice tinged with frustration. I can't make them see what I see. I can't force them to understand. Father Raphael hesitated, then said, perhaps it's time to share Solis's story more openly. People fear what they don't understand, but if they see the bond between you and the bird, if they see the goodness it brings, perhaps their hearts will soften. Maria nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. Could she really change their perceptions? Would they even listen? She glanced at Solis, who seemed to sense her unease. The bird let out a low hum, pressing its head against her arm in a gesture of comfort. The next day, with Father Raphael's encouragement, Maria invited the villagers to her cottage for a gathering. She spent the morning preparing, her hands trembling as she baked bread and arranged chairs in the small living room. Solis watched her, its golden eyes calm and steady, as if assuring her that everything would be fine. When the villagers arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Some entered hesitantly, their eyes darting around the room as though expecting something sinister to jump out at them. Others, including Tomas, stood outside, their arms crossed in defiance. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak. She told them about the night Solis was born, about the strange warmth she had felt in her body and the dream that had preceded it. She described the bird's first cry, the way it had looked at her with those intelligent, golden eyes. It's not a curse, she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. It's a gift. I don't know why it happened to me, but I believe it happened for a reason. She turned to Solis, who was perched on a wooden stand by the window. The bird spread its wings slightly, its feathers catching the light and casting a golden glow across the room. A few villagers gasped, their fear momentarily forgotten in the face of such beauty. It's just a bird, Tomas muttered from the doorway. A fancy bird maybe, but nothing more. Maria met his gaze, her own eyes filled with determination. Then why does it make you so afraid, Tomas? If it's just a bird, why do you feel the need to fight it? The room fell silent, all eyes on Tomas. He opened his mouth to reply but seemed to think better of it, his scowl deepening as he turned and walked away. The tension eased slightly after that, the villagers relaxing as Maria continued to speak. By the time they left, many of them seemed more curious than fearful, their whispered conversations carrying a note of wonder. But Maria knew it wasn't over. Tomas's departure had been a retreat, not a surrender. She could feel the weight of his anger lingering like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. In the days that followed, Solis began to exhibit behaviors that deepened the mystery surrounding it. It started to venture outside the cottage, its glowing feathers a beacon against the green of the valley. It would perch on the roof or the garden fence, watching the village with an almost regal air. Children would come running to see it, their laughter echoing through the hills, but adults often kept their distance, their unease still lingering. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Solis did something Maria hadn't seen before. It spread its massive wings and took flight, soaring high above the valley. Maria watched in awe as the bird circled the village, its feathers catching the last rays of sunlight and casting a golden glow over the rooftops. It was a sight so breathtaking that even the most skeptical villagers stopped to stare. When Solis returned, it landed gracefully in the garden, its chest puffed out as though it understood the spectacle it had created. Maria couldn't help but laugh, her earlier fears momentarily forgotten. "You're showing off now," she said, stroking its feathers. Solis let out a soft chirp, the sound warm and melodic. But the joy was short-lived. That night, as Maria lay in bed, a noise outside startled her awake. She sat up, her heart racing, and listened. The sound came again, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down her spine. She rushed to the window and peered out, her breath catching when she saw the source of the noise. A group of men, armed with torches and sticks, stood at the edge of her garden. Tomas was at the front, his face twisted with anger. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she stared out the window. The flames of the torches danced in the darkness, casting eerie shadows over the faces of the men gathered in her garden. Tomas stood at the front, his expression a mixture of anger and determination. Behind him, the others shifted uneasily, their grip on their makeshift weapons betraying their fear. Solis, perched on the garden fence, watched the men intently. The golden glow of its feathers seemed to intensify, casting a faint light over the group. The bird made no move, its posture calm but alert, as though it was weighing its options. Maria pulled on her shawl and stepped outside, her heart pounding. The cold night air bit at her skin, but she stood tall, her gaze fixed on Tomas. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Why are you here?" Tomas took a step forward, raising his torch higher. "We've had enough, Maria. That creature doesn't belong here. It's unnatural and it's bringing trouble to our village." Maria narrowed her eyes. "Trouble? What trouble has Solis caused? It has done nothing but exist, Tomas. Your fear is your own doing." "Fear?" Tomas spat, his voice rising. "You think this is about fear? It's about protecting our homes, our families. That thing is a danger and you're too blind to see it." The other men murmured in agreement, though their voices lacked Tomas's conviction. Maria looked at them, her heart aching. These were people she had known for years, shared meals with, laughed with. And yet here they were, turning against her because of their inability to understand. "I will not let you harm Solis," she said firmly, stepping closer to the bird. "If you want it gone, you'll have to go through me." Tomas's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around the torch. For a moment, it seemed as though he might press forward, but then Solis let out a low, resonant cry. The sound vibrated through the air, deep and melodic, carrying with it an inexplicable sense of calm. The men froze, their eyes widening as they felt the bird's presence wash over them. One by one they lowered their torches, their fear giving way to awe. Even Tomas hesitated, his anger faltering as he glanced back at the others. Maria took the opportunity to speak. "Look at it," she said, her voice softer now. "Does this look like a creature of malice? It's not here to harm us. It's here for a reason, though I don't yet know what that reason is. But I believe it is meant to teach us something, about wonder, about acceptance, about faith." The men exchanged uncertain glances. Tomas opened his mouth to argue, but one of the others, an older man named Mateo, stepped forward. "She's right," Mateo said, his voice heavy with thought. "We don't understand it, but that doesn't make it a threat. Maybe we need to stop seeing it as an enemy and start seeing it as a sign." Tomas's face darkened, but he said nothing. After a tense moment, he turned on his heel and stormed away, muttering under his breath. The others followed, their torches extinguished, leaving Maria and Solis alone under the stars. Maria let out a shaky breath, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. She reached out to steady herself, her hand brushing against Solis's feathers. The bird turned its head, its golden eyes meeting hers, and she felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the bird, to the stars, or to something greater. The days that followed were quieter, but the tension in the village lingered. Tomas kept his distance, but his disapproval was palpable, and Maria could feel the eyes of the villagers on her whenever she went into town. Father Raphael continued to offer his support, visiting often to check on her and Solis. "You've done well," he told her one afternoon as they sat in the garden. Solis was perched nearby, preening its feathers in the sunlight. "You stood your ground and you showed them that there's nothing to fear. But this is far from over." Maria nodded, her gaze distant. "I know. Tomas won't give up so easily. And I fear that others may join him if they feel threatened enough." Father Raphael sighed, his expression somber. "Fear is a powerful thing, Maria. But so is faith. You have to hold on to that." Maria tried to take comfort in his words, but the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. She knew that the peace they had achieved was fragile, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. That night, her unease manifested in another dream. She found herself standing in the same field as before, the great golden bird descending from the sky. But this time the scene was different. The sky was dark, filled with swirling clouds, and the bird's cry was urgent, almost pleading. It landed before her, its wings outstretched, and Maria felt a sense of urgency that made her chest tighten. When she woke, her heart was racing. She sat up in bed, her hand clutching her chest, and looked over at Solis, who was perched by the window. The bird was awake, its golden eyes fixed on her, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of the same urgency she had felt in her dream. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Solis let out a soft hum, its feathers glowing faintly in the moonlight. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that the dream was a warning, a glimpse of something yet to come. And as she lay back down, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder if she was ready for whatever it was. The following morning, Maria woke with a heaviness in her chest. The dream from the night before lingered like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts, its urgency pressing against her mind. She looked over at Solis, who was perched on the windowsill, its feathers catching the soft morning light. The bird's golden eyes met hers, and she felt an unspoken connection, a sense that Solis understood her unease. Determined to shake off the feeling, Maria busied herself with her chores. She swept the floor, watered the garden, and baked bread, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the weight of the dream. The air around her felt charged as though something unseen was building, waiting to break free. By midday, her sense of unease had grown into a gnawing anxiety. She stepped outside to gather herbs from her garden, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. As she worked, she noticed a group of villagers approaching her cottage. At the front of the group was Father Raphael, his expression grave. "Maria," he called out, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "May we speak with you?" Maria wiped her hands on her apron and nodded, her heart pounding. She ushered them inside, her eyes scanning the group for any signs of hostility. To her relief, there was no anger in their faces, only concern. "What's happened?" she asked once they were seated. Father Raphael hesitated, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "There's been an incident," he said carefully. "A few of the villagers reported seeing something strange in the woods last night." Maria frowned. "Strange? What kind of strange?" The priest glanced at the others, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally he said, "They described a figure, something large and glowing. At first they thought it was Solis, but this was different. It moved through the trees like a shadow, and when they tried to get closer, it vanished." Maria's stomach tightened. "Do you think it's connected to Solis?" "We don't know," Father Raphael admitted. "But the villagers are frightened. They're saying it's a bad omen, a sign that Solis has brought something dangerous to our village." Maria felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. "Solis has done nothing but exist," she said firmly. "Whatever they saw, it has nothing to do with him." "Perhaps," the priest said gently. "But fear doesn't listen to reason, Maria. I wanted to warn you before Tomas and his followers use this to stoke more unrest." Maria's fists clenched at her sides. She had hoped that Tomas's influence would wane after their last confrontation, but it seemed his grip on the fearful was stronger than ever. She looked over at Solis, who had perched quietly by the hearth, its gaze fixed on the group. The bird let out a soft, mournful hum, as if it understood the burden it was carrying. "I won't let them hurt him," Maria said, her voice resolute. "I don't care what they believe, they won't touch Solis." Father Raphael nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Be careful, Maria. Desperation can make people do terrible things." After the group left, Maria sat by the fire, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't face Tomas and his followers alone, but she also couldn't bear the thought of losing Solis. The bird had become more than just a companion, it was a part of her, a living connection to something greater than herself. As the day wore on, Maria's resolve hardened. She decided to confront the fear head-on, to show the villagers that whatever they thought they had seen was not a threat. That evening, she walked into the village square with Solis perched on her arm, its feathers glowing softly in the fading light. The villagers stopped what they were doing and turned to watch, their faces a mixture of awe and unease. "Listen to me," Maria called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know some of you are afraid. I know there are whispers of omens and curses. But I'm here to tell you that Solis is not your enemy." She held the bird higher, letting its golden light wash over the crowd. "This creature is a gift, a reminder of the wonders we cannot always explain. Whatever you think you saw in the woods, it is not Solis. And it is not here to harm you." For a moment there was silence. Then, to Maria's surprise, one of the villagers stepped forward. It was Matteo, the older man who had spoken up during the confrontation in her garden. "I believe you, Maria," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "I've seen Solis with my own eyes. He is not a creature of darkness." Others nodded, their fear giving way to tentative agreement. But not everyone was convinced. Tomas stepped forward, his scowl deepening. "You're blind," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "All of you. That thing is a danger, and you'll see it soon enough." Before Maria could respond, Tomas turned and stormed away, his followers trailing behind him. The crowd began to disperse after that, some lingering to offer Maria words of support, others retreating with uncertainty still etched on their faces. As Maria walked back to her cottage, she couldn't shake the feeling that Tomas's defiance was far from over. She glanced at Solis, who let out a soft chirp and nuzzled against her shoulder. The bird's warmth steadied her, but the weight of the situation remained heavy on her chest. That night, Maria dreamed again. She was standing in the same field, the sky dark and turbulent above her. Solis was there, its feathers glowing brighter than ever, but this time it wasn't alone. A second bird, larger and darker, loomed in the distance, its eyes burning with a red light that sent a chill down her spine. The two creatures circled each other, their cries echoing through the air like a mournful psalm. When Maria woke, her hands were trembling. She looked over at Solis, who was perched by the window, its golden eyes fixed on her. For the first time she saw fear in its gaze. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "What are you trying to tell me?" Solis let out a low, resonant hum, and Maria felt a wave of unease wash over her. The dream had been a warning, she was certain of it. And whatever was coming, she knew it was drawing closer. The next morning, Maria woke to the sound of heavy footsteps outside her cottage. She sat up, her heart pounding, and peered out the window. A group of men stood at the edge of her garden, led once again by Tomas. This time they were armed not with torches but with ropes, nets, and crude weapons. The sight made her stomach churn. Solis, perched on the windowsill, let out a sharp, urgent cry. The bird's feathers flared with light, casting golden reflections onto the walls of the cottage. Maria stood and rushed to the door, throwing it open before the men could take another step. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "Why are you here?" Tomas stepped forward, his expression hard and unyielding. "We've had enough, Maria. That creature is bringing danger to our village. People are afraid. We've come to deal with it." Maria's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Deal with it? Solis has done nothing wrong. It has brought no harm to anyone. Tell that to the villagers who saw that thing in the woods," Tomas snapped. "Tell that to the children who wake up screaming from nightmares of glowing eyes and shadows. This isn't just about you, Maria. It's about all of us." Behind him, some of the men shifted uncomfortably, their eyes avoiding hers. It was clear that not all of them shared Tomas's conviction, but fear had bound them to his cause. Maria took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "You don't understand," she said, her voice firm but pleading. "Solis is not a threat. It's here for a reason I don't fully understand yet. But whatever you think you're protecting the village from, this isn't the way." Tomas's scowl deepened. "Enough of this. Step aside, Maria." "No," she said, planting herself firmly between them and the cottage. "If you want to get to Solis, you'll have to go through me." For a moment, no one moved. The tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. Then Tomas raised his hand, signaling for the others to move forward. Maria's heart lurched, but before she could react, Solis let out a piercing cry. The sound was unlike anything Maria had heard before, sharp and resonant, carrying a power that seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. The men froze, their eyes wide with fear as Solis spread its wings. The golden light emanating from its feathers intensified, bathing the entire garden in a warm, otherworldly glow. Tomas stumbled back, his face pale. What is it doing?" he stammered. Maria didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on Solis, whose gaze was fixed on the men. The bird's cry softened into a melodic hum, and Maria felt a strange calm wash over her. It was as though Solis was speaking, not with words but with its presence, its light. The men began to lower their weapons, their fear giving way to something else, wonder. But Tomas was not so easily swayed. He shook his head, his grip tightening on the net in his hands. "No," he muttered. "This is a trick. A distraction. Don't fall for it." He lunged forward, the net raised, but before he could reach Solis, the bird lifted into the air with a powerful beat of its wings. The light around it flared, momentarily blinding everyone in the garden. When the light faded, Solis was gone, a faint golden trail lingering in the sky. Maria's knees buckled and she sank to the ground, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know where Solis had gone or if it would return, but she felt its absence like a weight in her chest. The men stood in stunned silence, their weapons hanging limply at their sides. One by one they began to back away, murmuring to each other as they retreated. Even Tomas seemed shaken, though his face was twisted with anger. "This isn't over," he spat before turning and stalking away. Maria sat in the garden long after they had gone, her eyes fixed on the sky. She felt empty, as though a part of her had been torn away. Solis had been more than just a companion, it had been a source of light, of hope. And now that light was gone. The days that followed were a blur. Maria went through the motions of her daily routines, but her heart wasn't in it. The cottage felt cold and empty without Solis, its absence a constant ache. The villagers, too, seemed subdued. The confrontation in the garden had left its mark, and though no one spoke of it openly, the tension in the air was palpable. Father Raphael visited often, his presence a small comfort in the silence that had settled over Maria's home. He sat with her by the fire, his hands clasped around a mug of tea, and listened as she poured out her grief. "I don't understand," she said one evening, her voice thick with tears. "Why did it leave? Did I fail it somehow?" The priest shook his head. You didn't fail, Maria. Solis left because it had to. Perhaps it sensed that its presence was causing more harm than good. Or perhaps it had a purpose beyond what we can see. Maria wiped her eyes, though the tears kept coming. I just want it back. I know, Father Raphael said softly. But sometimes, letting go is the hardest and most important thing we can do. Maria nodded, though her heart wasn't ready to accept his words. She spent her nights staring out the window, hoping to see a flash of golden light in the sky. But the nights remained dark and the silence deepened. Then one night everything changed. Maria was awoken by a faint sound, a soft, melodic hum that sent a shiver down her spine. She sat up, her breath catching as the sound grew louder, closer. She rushed to the window and gasped. There in the distance was a golden glow. It moved through the trees like a beacon, drawing closer with each passing moment. Maria threw open the door and stepped outside, her heart racing. Solis emerged from the woods, its feathers glowing brighter than ever. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, a second bird followed, a massive creature with dark iridescent feathers that shimmered with shades of blue and green. Its eyes glowed with a faint red light, and its presence was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Maria's breath hitched as she took in the sight. The two birds circled each other in the garden, their cries mingling in a hauntingly beautiful harmony. She felt a wave of emotions wash over her, joy, fear, and something she couldn't quite name. Solis landed gracefully at her feet, its golden eyes meeting hers. The second bird remained in the air, its gaze fixed on Maria with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. She didn't know what it wanted, but she knew, deep in her soul, that this was only the beginning. Maria's hands trembled as she stepped closer to Solis. The golden bird's familiar warmth radiated toward her, its glowing feathers a beacon of reassurance amidst the strange and overwhelming presence of the second creature. The dark bird circled overhead, its wings slicing through the air in deliberate, measured movements. Its crimson eyes glowed faintly, and every beat of its wings seemed to pulse with an almost otherworldly energy. Solis, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. What is happening? The golden bird let out a low, melodic hum, its gaze steady and calm. But the other bird, larger and darker, let out a sharp, echoing cry that pierced through the night. It was not a sound of malice but of power, something ancient and commanding that sent shivers down Maria's spine. The villagers had begun to gather. Drawn by the sound of the cries and the strange glow in the sky, they approached Maria's cottage cautiously, their faces illuminated by the golden and blue-green light emanating from the two birds. Some clutched lanterns or tools, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. What is that? Someone whispered. It's not like Solis, another murmured. It feels different. Maria turned to face them, her heart racing. She could see the unease growing in their eyes, the seeds of fear that Tomas had planted threatening to sprout once more. She took a deep breath and raised her hands trying to calm them. Please, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Do not be afraid. Solis has returned, and this other bird, it is not here to harm us. Her words did little to ease their fear. Tomas pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face twisted in anger. This is what I warned you about, he shouted, pointing toward the dark bird. I told you that thing would bring trouble, and now look. Another one has come, and it's worse, bigger, more dangerous. Do you see now? Do you see what she's brought upon us? The crowd murmured, their fear threatening to boil over. Maria clenched her fists, fighting to keep her composure. She turned to Solis, silently willing the bird to help her. The golden creature seemed to understand. It spread its wings, letting out a soft, resonant hum that washed over the villagers like a soothing wave. Some of them relaxed, their expressions softening as the bird's light enveloped them. But Tomas remained unmoved. He turned to the dark bird, his eyes narrowing. And what about that one? He demanded. What kind of creature is it? What does it want? The dark bird descended slowly, landing in the garden with a grace that belied its massive size. Its iridescent feathers shimmered in the moonlight, and its crimson eyes locked onto Tomas. For a moment no one dared to move. Then the bird let out a low, rumbling cry, a sound that resonated in the earth beneath their feet. Maria stepped forward, her heart pounding. It's not here to hurt us, she said, her voice firm. I don't know why it's here, but I believe it is connected to Solis. They are part of something greater, something we don't yet understand. Tomas scoffed. You expect us to believe that? Look at it. That's no miracle, it's a monster. The dark bird tilted its head, its glowing eyes fixed on Tomas. Maria could feel the tension in the air, a taut string ready to snap. She took another step forward, placing herself between Tomas and the bird. "Stop this," she said, her voice rising. "Your fear will destroy us if you let it. Look at them, really look. Do they seem like creatures of malice? Or are you letting your ignorance blind you?" For a moment Tomas faltered. But then he shook his head, his jaw tightening. "You're the one who's blind, Maria. These things don't belong here, and the longer they stay, the more danger we're in." Before Maria could respond, the dark bird let out another cry. This one was different, higher, sharper, and filled with an urgency that made her chest tighten. Solis responded with a melodic hum, and the two birds began to circle each other, their movements slow and deliberate. The villagers watched in silence, their fear giving way to curiosity as the birds moved in perfect harmony. The golden light from Solis intertwined with the blue-green glow of the dark bird, creating an ethereal display that left them awestruck. "What are they doing?" someone whispered. Maria shook her head, her eyes locked on the two creatures. She didn't have an answer, but she could feel the energy in the air shifting, growing. It was as if the birds were building towards something, their cries and movements growing more synchronized with each passing moment. Then, without warning, the dark bird turned its gaze toward the forest. It let out a powerful cry, and Solis joined in, their voices merging into a hauntingly beautiful harmony. The light around them flared, illuminating the trees and casting long shadows over the village. Maria's breath caught as she saw movement in the forest. Shapes emerged from the shadows, figures that were neither human nor animal. They were translucent, glowing faintly in the moonlight, and their forms shifted as they moved. The villagers gasped, some stepping back in fear, while others stared in stunned silence. What are they?" Matteo asked, his voice barely audible. Maria didn't know. She could only watch as the figures moved closer, their forms becoming more distinct. They looked like birds, but their shapes were fluid, their feathers shimmering like water in the moonlight. They surrounded the dark bird and Solis, their cries blending into the strange, otherworldly song that filled the night. The energy in the air reached its peak, a tangible force that seemed to vibrate in Maria's bones. She could feel it, a connection to something vast and incomprehensible. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Solis, who turned to meet her gaze. "What does it mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you trying to show us?" Solis let out a soft cry, and Maria felt a wave of understanding wash over her. The birds, the light, the dark, and the spectral figures, they were not enemies. They were part of a balance, a harmony that stretched beyond the confines of human understanding. They had come to remind her, to remind all of them, of the beauty and complexity of the world. As the song reached its crescendo, the light around the birds flared one final time, so bright that Maria had to shield her eyes. When it faded, the dark bird and the spectral figures were gone, leaving only Solis standing in the garden. The golden bird looked at Maria, its eyes filled with a quiet wisdom, and she felt her heart swell with gratitude. The villagers were silent, their faces a mixture of wonder and reflection. Even Tomas seemed at a loss for words, his anger replaced by something softer, more uncertain. Maria turned to them, her voice steady. "Do you see now? This is not something to fear. It is a reminder, a gift. We must learn to live with wonder instead of letting fear rule us." For the first time no one argued. The villagers nodded slowly, their expressions thoughtful as they began to disperse. Tomas lingered for a moment, his eyes locked on Solis, before turning and walking away without a word. Maria watched them go, her heart heavy but hopeful. She looked at Solis, who let out a soft hum and nuzzled against her hand. Together, they stood under the stars, the golden light of the bird a beacon in the darkness. The days that followed were marked by an unusual quiet in the village. It wasn't the silence of unease as it had been before, but one of reflection. The confrontation in Maria's garden and the otherworldly display by Solis and the spectral figures had left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. The villagers went about their routines with a newfound sense of humility, their whispers carrying more curiosity than fear. Maria felt the shift too. When she went to the market, the villagers greeted her with cautious smiles instead of suspicious glances. Children who had once been afraid now lingered outside her garden, hoping to catch a glimpse of Solis. Even Tomas, though he still kept his distance, seemed less hostile, his anger tempered by something he couldn't quite understand. Solis remained a constant presence in Maria's life, its golden light filling her cottage with warmth and comfort. The bond between them deepened, the birds' gentle hums and melodic cries speaking to her in ways that words never could. She often found herself sitting by the fire, stroking its soft feathers and wondering about the mysteries it carried within. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the sky, Maria sat on her porch with Solis perched beside her. The air was cool and still, the faint chirping of crickets the only sound. She gazed out at the village, her heart heavy with questions. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is my purpose in all of this?" Solis let out a soft chirp, its golden eyes meeting hers. Maria felt a familiar warmth wash over her, but it was accompanied by a sense of longing, as though the bird was trying to tell her something it couldn't express. That night, Maria dreamed again. She was standing in the same field, the sky above her clear and endless. Solis was there, its feathers glowing brighter than ever, but this time there were no other birds, no spectral figures. It was just the two of them standing together in the quiet. Maria felt a sense of peace unlike anything she had experienced before. She reached out to Solis, her hand brushing against its feathers, and in that moment she understood. The bird's presence in her life was not just a miracle, it was a call to action. Solis had come to her not as an answer but as a question, a reminder that the world was filled with wonders that defied explanation. When she woke, the dream lingered in her mind, its message clear. Maria knew what she had to do. The next morning she walked into the village square with Solis at her side. The golden bird's light drew the attention of everyone around, and soon a crowd had gathered. Maria stood tall, her voice steady as she addressed them. "For weeks we have lived with fear," she began. "Fear of the unknown, fear of what we don't understand. But last night I realized something. Solis didn't come to bring us answers. It came to remind us to ask questions, to look at the world with wonder instead of fear." The villagers listened in silence, their faces thoughtful. Maria gestured to Solis, who spread its wings, its golden feathers catching the sunlight. "This bird is not a threat. It is a gift, a reminder that there is so much more to the world than we can see or understand. We have spent too long dividing ourselves, between faith and doubt, between fear and acceptance. But what if we chose a different path? What if we chose to embrace the mystery?" For a moment no one spoke. Then Matteo stepped forward, his expression serious. "You're right, Maria," he said. "We've let fear cloud our judgment. But what do we do now? How do we move forward?" Maria smiled, her heart swelling with hope. "We start by listening, by learning, by opening our hearts to the possibility that there is more to this world than we can explain." The villagers nodded slowly, their faces softening as they looked at Solis. Even Tomas, who stood at the edge of the crowd, seemed to waver, his anger giving way to something closer to acceptance. In the weeks that followed, the village began to change. Solis became a symbol of hope and unity, its presence a reminder of the wonders that lay beyond human understanding. The villagers worked together to build a sanctuary for the bird, a place where it could live freely while still being a part of their lives. Children came to visit, their laughter ringing through the air as they marveled at Solis's glowing feathers. Maria too found herself transformed. The fear and doubt that had once weighed her down were replaced by a sense of purpose. She became a storyteller, sharing her experiences with anyone who would listen. Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had faced the unknown and come out stronger for it. One evening, as Maria sat by the fire with Solis perched beside her, Father Raphael visited. The priest's face was calm, his eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You've done something remarkable, Maria," he said. "You've turned fear into faith, doubt into wonder." Maria shook her head, a soft smile on her lips. "It wasn't just me. Solis showed us the way." The priest nodded, his gaze shifting to the golden bird. "Do you think it will stay forever?" Maria looked at Solis, her heart heavy with the knowledge she had carried since that dream. "No," she said softly. "I think it has a purpose beyond this place. One day it will leave. But when it does, it will leave behind something far greater." Father Raphael smiled, his expression thoughtful. "Hope." Maria nodded. "Hope. And the courage to embrace the unknown." The years passed and the village flourished. Solis remained a beloved presence, its light a beacon for all who came to see it. Maria grew older, her hair silver and her steps slower, but her spirit remained strong. She continued to share her stories, her voice carrying the wisdom of a life lived with wonder. Then one quiet evening, Solis spread its wings and took flight. Maria watched from her porch as the bird soared into the sky, its golden light fading into the horizon. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, of joy, of knowing that she had been a part of something extraordinary. As the villagers gathered to comfort her, Maria smiled through her tears. "It's not gone," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "It's just begun a new journey." And in her heart, she knew it was true. In the days after Solis's departure, the village seemed quieter, as if it too was mourning the absence of its golden light. Maria sat on her porch each evening, her gaze fixed on the horizon where she had last seen the bird disappear. Though the ache of its absence was sharp, she carried a deep sense of peace, knowing that Solis had left for a purpose far greater than she could comprehend. The sanctuary they had built for Solis now stood empty, but it remained a place of reflection for the villagers. People would come to sit in its quiet, golden glow, now lit by the soft, warm light of lanterns crafted to mimic Solis's feathers. They brought flowers, whispered prayers, and shared stories of how the bird had touched their lives. Maria's life, though quieter without Solis, remained rich with meaning. Visitors from distant towns began to arrive, drawn by the tales of the miraculous bird. At first, Maria hesitated to share her story with strangers, fearing they might not understand. But as she saw the hope and wonder in their eyes, she realized that the story of Solis was not hers alone. It belonged to everyone who was willing to listen. She became known as the storyteller of the valley, her words weaving together the threads of wonder, fear, and faith that had defined her journey. Children would sit at her feet, their eyes wide with fascination as she spoke of Solis's arrival, its glowing feathers, and the harmony it had brought to the village. "It wasn't just a bird," she would say, her voice soft but firm. "It was a reminder of all the things we cannot see, the mysteries we cannot solve. It taught us to embrace the unknown, to find beauty in what we don't understand." The children would nod, their imaginations alight with the images she painted. And though Maria often wondered if they truly understood, she knew that the seeds of curiosity and wonder had been planted in their hearts. One day, as Maria sat in the sanctuary, a young woman approached her. She was not from the village, her clothes were modern, her demeanor confident yet respectful. She carried a notebook in her hand, its pages filled with scribbled notes and sketches. "Are you Maria?" the woman asked, her voice warm. Maria nodded, her eyes studying the stranger. "I am. And you are?" "My name is Elena," the woman said, sitting beside her. "I'm an artist. I heard about Solis and I came to learn its story." Maria smiled, her heart warming at the mention of Solis. "You've come to the right place." Elena opened her notebook, showing Maria the sketches she had made based on the descriptions she had gathered from the villagers. They were beautiful, delicate lines and vibrant colors that captured the essence of Solis, even without its golden light. "I want to share this story with the world," Elena said. "Not just the story of Solis but the story of this village, of you. I think people need to be reminded of the wonder that exists in the world." Maria's smile grew, her chest swelling with pride and gratitude. "Then I will tell you everything," she said, "and you will carry it forward." 4 days, Maria and Elena sat together, weaving the story of Solis into words and images that would travel far beyond the valley. Elena sketched tirelessly, her hands moving with a purpose that reminded Maria of the way Solis had flown through the sky. And as Maria recounted the tale, she felt as though she was reliving it, each memory as vivid as the day it had happened. When Elena finally departed, her notebook filled with sketches and notes, Maria felt a sense of closure. She knew that Solis's story was no longer confined to the valley, it had taken flight, just as the bird itself had done. And though she missed Solis deeply, she found comfort in knowing that its light would continue to shine in the hearts of those who heard its story. Years passed and Maria's steps grew slower, her hair whiter. The villagers cared for her as she had once cared for them, bringing her food, tending to her garden, and sitting with her on her porch as she watched the sunset. Her role as the storyteller of the valley remained, her voice growing softer but no less powerful. One evening, as Maria sat alone under the stars, she felt a familiar warmth wash over her. She looked up and saw a golden light on the horizon, faint but unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat as she stood, her heart racing. "Solis," she whispered. The light grew brighter, and for a moment, Maria could have sworn she saw the shape of wings against the night sky. Tears filled her eyes as she watched the light dance on the horizon, its glow filling her heart with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Maria closed her eyes, her hands clasped over her heart. She didn't know if the light was real or a memory, but it didn't matter. Solis had never truly left her, it had simply moved on, its presence a part of the world now, just as it had always been. That night, Maria passed away in her sleep, a soft smile on her lips. The villagers mourned her deeply, their grief tempered by the knowledge that she had lived a life filled with wonder and purpose. They buried her in the sanctuary, beneath the golden lanterns that still glowed softly in the dark. And though Solis never returned to the valley, its story lived on. Elena's work had traveled far and wide, inspiring countless others to look at the world with fresh eyes. The sanctuary became a place of pilgrimage, a symbol of hope and unity that drew people from all walks of life. And in the quiet of the valley, where the stars shone brightly and the air was filled with the whispers of the past, the light of Solis remained. Not in feathers or wings, but in the hearts of those who had embraced its message, who had learned to live with wonder, to find beauty in the unknown. For in the end, Solis had been right all along. The greatest gift was not the answers it had brought, but the questions it had left behind.